Hi, this is your host, Laura Powers, and I'm so pleased today to have Marisa Imon on the show. She is best-selling author of the book Super Intense, and we're here to talk about her journey as it relates to mental health and doing it unmedicated and her process and journey with doing that. So I'm so excited to have you on to talk about this. Thanks for being a guest on the show.
Yay, Laura. I'm always so happy to talk with you. Thank you so much for
Oh,
having me on.
me too. And if you're into music or a creator of any kind, I definitely recommend you check out our episode on Behind the Music podcast, where we talked about making music and making music from home. But today we're here to talk about the other side of the sort of creativity and expression. And I love the title of your book, Super Intense, and a way to like take something back that might be labeled as bad or negative and like really owning it and thinking of it as like a superpower. So for those who aren't familiar with you, I'd love if you'd share a little bit about your story and journey.
Yeah, thank you so much. So essentially all my childhood, pretty much the first word my dad used to describe me as an infant was intense. And like, I don't know how an infant can be intense. I feel so bad for my parents looking back on it, right? Because like they're the sweetest humans and I apparently kept them up all night, like all throughout childhood. And I, you know, if you look back in my journals, it makes a lot of sense that by age 19, I ended up being diagnosed with bipolar type 1. But up until then, I didn't really have any idea. And if you were to look back at my journals, you'd see, for a few weeks at a time, I would be the worst person in the world. And like, I hated everything and everyone hated me. And like, that's how I felt. I felt like life was horrible. And I was just this horrible human being. And then every now and then you'd see like, I love everything. Everyone loves me. Everything's fantastic. And everything was always very hyperbolic. Like it was either the greatest thing ever or the worst thing ever. And there was, I can remember my first time having suicidal thoughts at age 10. So it was like always just very, very intense. I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. And I remember I wasn't raised not spiritual, but I was brought up to kind of like find my own path. I was born Jewish, so we did do a lot of ceremonies related to Judaism as a kid, but at the same time, my mom is just very spiritual. She's a Reiki master, like just a super cool human to know. And so she was always like, explore what you want to explore, whether it's Buddhism or Taoism. She would just show me these other things. So I didn't really know what I believed, but I remember at age 10, like praying to whatever, being like, I don't know what there is, but whatever there is, will you take my life to end the suffering of other lives out
Oh,
there? So like instant
oh,
martyrdom as a kid. I was just
right.
like instant martyr. and, and then by 19, all of these things had just kind of spiraled up. And at this point I had tacked on the diagnoses of depression, anxiety, ADD, insomnia, and bulimia. And then when all of a sudden I wasn't sleeping for, a few weeks at a time, and the intense mania started to build. I had so much energy. It felt amazing. I learned how to code a website. This is back in 2005. Like that was a big deal. And it wasn't like we had Wix,
Yeah, right.
or Squarespace or something. And I was involved in so many things. And it got to the point where I started this, they called it delusional thinking, that I was either a superhero here to save the world or an evil villain sent to destroy the superhero version of me, which was very messy. And during this time, I was actually like there's nothing against atheism. Like I'm pro, believe whatever you want to believe. But I was one of those jerk atheists who was like, how can you believe in anything? Like I was just such a jerk about being an atheist. Like I believed it so hard that I thought if you didn't believe it, that you were an idiot, which is so hilarious and ironic because the same belief system could be said for anything. You can't prove it does exist. You can't prove it doesn't. So like really I was only proving my own idiocy looking back on it, but whatever. So because of this, I think a lot of the stuff that I was experiencing now, I recognize as a spiritual lens, like seeing auras and, hearing voices and guidance that I didn't have any kind of understanding of before.
Right.
Just made me feel crazy. And
By
so
the way, I feel like that's very common for people who are sensitive or psychic, where you're like, I must be crazy because society doesn't recognize these things. I mean, I thought it for years. I was like, I guess I'm crazy. and,
right.
and I think it's so good to talk about this because that's actually a very normal experience that people are silently experiencing by themselves, for the most
It's so
part.
true, Laura. And now that
Mhm.
I do have a broader perspective of it, a lot of the stuff that would have been considered crazy before, I'm just now like, well, this is my life and I love it.
That's great.
But it got to the point where I don't remember a lot of this time in my life, and I really was completely out of touch with reality. I wasn't on the same page as everyone else. I was very paranoid that my friends were plotting against me. And a dear friend of mine called my parents, and I was a sophomore in college at the time, and I was well beyond the period where you can like withdraw without it affecting your grades, but they gave me like a rare exception because I ended up not only being diagnosed bipolar type 1, but at the time I was diagnosed as clinically insane. And so I was released into my parents' custody. And I was just totally drugged up. And honestly, Laura, where I was at my life at that point, that saved my life. Like being heavily medicated and like sedated did save me because I was totally like,
you needed something to help you.
I was out of touch with reality. In fact, schizophrenia was on the table. So like, I'm not anti-medications, but I was told after that I'd have to be medicated for life. And I probably couldn't go back to school for a full year. And the whole time, even without any kind of spiritual understanding, I was just like, this, in the back of my mind, like, this can't be possible. This can't be the truth. Like, I just felt like I don't know any better yet, but I do have this feeling inside of me that this is not the truth. However, because I didn't know any better, I was just like, all right, I'll just follow what the doctors say. The only difference is I went to school earlier than they wanted me to, but I kept, my strict regimen of, 12 rainbow color pills a day, like,
wow. Yeah.
it was probably more than that at some point, but by the time we got they call it the cocktail, I guess they try to make it sound more fun than it is. Once we got the right cocktail down, it was about 12 pills a day. And it got to the point where I was like at the mercy of the pills or the mercy of the moods. And it was like, how is it supposed to be that I'm just living at the mercy of something else my whole life? I just don't want to accept that. I don't think that that's real or true. And at the time, I couldn't find a doctor that would help me with anything else besides like, you have to be medicated for life with bipolar type 1. That's just the message I got from like 12 different medical professionals. And so, again, not anti-medication, but when it's like to the point where if I don't take it, I am totally feeling withdrawal symptoms, like there were some pills that if I didn't take it, my head would go zzz, zzz, every time I turned my head, like,
Wow.
or I'd start shaking. Some of them would make me totally like dead to the world, even if I didn't take them within, a couple hours of the regular time. It was so difficult to keep up with. So this is when I was like, you know what, there's got to be another way. And I decided all this time of being such a jerk atheist hasn't served me. I will be open to a spiritual practice. And that's kind of when things started to change. And we can get into that more, but that's like a shift in the story if we want to pause there for any thoughts or questions you might have.
Yeah, well, I just want to point out that I feel like people that are very psychic and super powered is another way you might think about this. That when they go into a traditional system, I think it is considered mental illness because we are not the typical, but I don't view that as a bad thing. And I have looked at people that are homeless on the street, I'm sure would be medically diagnosed with, one or perhaps many mental illnesses. And I look at them and I'm like, you are super psychic. Like I can just tell they're super psychic, right. And they just don't have tools. They have not been given tools to know how to handle this in a safe way for them. These kinds of abilities I think are very powerful, actually. They're incredibly powerful. And it's kind of like, wielding an incredible chainsaw or something that can cut something that is then an amazing tool or building material, or it can cut and destroy people, including yourself as you're wielding it. And I feel like that's the case with these people with very strong abilities. Like this is an amazing tool, but if you don't know how to handle it, it can literally destroy you.
You're speaking to my heart. Yes.
Yeah. And I just want to say that because I grew up thinking I was probably crazy. I grew up with a very negative self-concept of myself because I could hear voices and they were never saying nice things. They were always saying very negative things. I was suicidal, particularly in middle school, very challenging times. And I think thankfully I'm very strong and I know you are too. And we were able to get through these very challenging times, but I really want to help shift society to reframe how we look at this, and like not label just because you're not sort of the normal or typical as being automatically a bad thing. And it's more just about how do we understand this better? How do we handle it? How do we orient differently, instead of just labeling as anything that's different is automatically bad? It's just such a pet peeve of mine in society.
Mine too, completely. And I make the analogy, you talked about it so well when you're talking about, it's like a chainsaw. Like you can either use it for good or you can use it for bad. And the analogy I like to make is, if you think about it, any superhero origin story, for the most part, when they get their powers, they have no idea how to use them. And it's
Yeah.
hard. And they don't
Yes.
know what they're doing. And they're stumbling around. And it's like
Yes.
some of
And
them,
feeling weird and different and like wrong.
yes. And some of them end up using it for bad because, well, I'm sure there's a million different reasons, they all have their stories, but you can learn to wield it for good or you can learn to wield it for bad, but either way, it takes learning and it takes working with it. And so like the day when I decided I'm going to commit to learning how to work with it instead of feeling like it's working against me, it became my own superhero training where it's daily commitment. And every day to this day, I have to make the commitment and put my own emotional well-being first, because I'm still feeling things super intensely. And I wouldn't have it any other way at this point, but it is commitment to use these superpowers really for good in the world. And it takes work and commitment, but it's so worth it.
It's so worth it. And I think also people have these abilities are basically sensing things that most other people can't, and they're sensing the non-physical realm. And so I'm just going to say this, like a lot of people, for the most part, what I've gotten is that people's actual own thoughts are positive. They're positive.
Yeah.
And what we do is we pick up on from entities, from non-physical beings, these other, what we would probably label as negative thoughts. And when we can understand and think of it as other and not internalize it, for me, that's been very helpful. Like, oh, this isn't automatically mine. I don't have to engage with this. I don't have to own it. And I also then don't have to really take it to heart. Like, oh,
Exactly.
it's like someone's just yelling something at you. If someone's just yelling something, you walk by and they yell something hateful or whatever, you're not like, oh my God, that's so true. Or like, or, oh, it's mine. Like, I feel that, but that's what's happening psychically. As people that are very psychic, we're constantly getting bombarded with things other people are thinking, energy beings, all this stuff. And the fascinating thing is that a lot of these beings, I think of them, the entities, as like energy parasites, and they literally change like our filter of how we perceive things. So the same thing can be perceived like, we suddenly can put a very negative spin on something, like you said, like you just felt like people were against you, and I have been shown that they will literally even change how you literally see things sometimes. So like, for example, people that have body dysmorphia disorder, I'm sure you probably know that term, right?
Yeah.
For those who might not, it's, people typically that have bulimia or anorexia, and when they look in the mirror, they see something completely different than what's physically there. And what I've been shown psychically is that what people that have this, there's an entity that literally goes in there and like changes what they're seeing, so that they will see someone much larger or something, like morph the features to make you look like, whatever they're trying to trigger that makes you feel badly about yourself. So these entities are like parasites that feed on fear, anxiety, stress, worry, chaos, whatever. They're all different kinds. But that's the thing that's fascinating. So you can, if you have one of these and they're interacting with you, your perception of reality is going to be very different. And so it's important to just ask for clearing protection. Archangel Michael is an incredibly powerful being to help with that. And then also just ask for that continual processing. And then if we can just take a step back and think, is this loving? Is this of the light? Is this, objectively true? Is this how I would talk to a child? Is, all these things about yourself. And a lot of times I can get us to like stop spinning out, because I'm amazed how even I know this happens and I like hear them, because I still hear voices, and I know, okay, this isn't mine. I don't have to think of myself as crazy. I'm just like hearing this kind of psychic conversation that's happening. And I'll know it. And it's still, even knowing it, it still can sometimes be hard to not get pulled in. So I have compassion for anyone who struggles. You did a recent video about this, talking about how do you kind of pull yourself out of that and not get so bogged down by this? Can you share some of the tips that work for
So
you?
actually, it's like my favorite technique now is because at this point, Laura, even if it was parasites or lower entities giving me these thoughts for so long, it got to the point where my brain probably rewired so that it believed those things to be true. So for a
Right.
long time in my life, I was having the thought, regardless of where it came from, that I'm the worst person in the world. Like that thought just kept coming. And it's like absurd, really. Like when you get it out there, like, I mean, worst person in the world, God. There's
That's pretty bad.
I'd have to
Hitler
be
and
doing
Pol
a
Pot.
lot. Yeah. Like, I mean, it's impressive, really. But so, so every time these thoughts come up now, instead of looking at them like they are the ultimate truth or that they are bad, even, I think for so long I was told that my negative, quote unquote, negative thoughts were bad. So I viewed them as bad and I tried to ignore them. I tried to run away from them. But instead they're like backseat drivers in the car telling me where to go
Yeah.
and they're still controlling me. So instead, when I was like, hey, all right, why don't you just tell me what you got to say? And I'm not going to take it personally. I'm going to view it as truly a small, scared child telling me how they're feeling, because ultimately, all those voices, at least for me inside of me, that are saying that really are the small, scared child part of me who felt that way so long ago. And I never was able to look at her, hold her hand, and tell her, it's okay, even though you feel that way. And not only that, the way I like to look at them too, this is my favorite thing, Laura. So I believe I first heard an analogy like this listening to Abraham Hicks. I can't remember where, it was something related to this, but the idea is that the road is essentially your desires. Like you're driving down your road in life, and being on the road is following your desires. Every time we get fears and anxieties, they're like rumble strips on the side of the road. And so they might pop up real quick and be like, oh, this feeling doesn't feel good in my heart or my stomach. Something doesn't feel right. But we don't listen to it because we've been told all our lives that it's bad. So just ignore it, just push through it. That's what we're told. So we just keep going off the rumble strips more and more and more. And we feel more and more uncomfortable. And next thing we know, we're in a ditch. But if instead we had just listened to that very first feeling and used it to help us gain clarity on our desires. So if that voice is telling me that I'm the worst human in the world, it must mean that I have a very strong desire to feel loved and respected, because we don't feel bad about things we don't care about. Like no voice could tell me that I make the worst ketchup in the world. That's not going to hurt me because I don't make any ketchup.
Laugh, yeah.
Like I don't care. Like but if like my ultimate dream in life was to be this amazing ketchup creator and that voice happened, it would show that I have a strong desire to make ketchup. And I use such an absurd example because that really shows you how much whatever lower feeling you're having means that you have a strong desire for its opposite. And so instead, when we look at it and go, thank you so much for reminding me about this desire. Now I can lean into this desire to feel loved and accepted. And I can even imagine myself holding that small child version of me that felt like that and be like, I love you. I'm going to give you those feelings that you wish you had then. And instead of it feeling like that lower emotion is ruling/ruining my life, now it's benefiting me. Now I'm using it for good.
I think this is so important. And I think about this a little differently, but it's very similar in that, when you're in fear or worry, whatever is causing that, whether it's a thought about yourself or maybe an outcome with a loved one, whatever, it's kind of like a prayer for something you don't want.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, it is telling you, again, like you can clue in, what do I want? Oh, I want the opposite of whatever that is telling me. So just like hear it, like you said, don't be in fear about it. Don't run away. But at the same time, then it's like, okay, angels, help me with whatever is that I do want. That's not whatever that is showing me.
Yeah.
And the other thing is that I do literally feel like these are frequently, these kind of thoughts are orienting from, different beings, or it could be even a past life element of ourself, some kind of personality that has gone through that kind of trauma or whatever it is that we're deeply in fear of. But whatever it is, when we run away from something, it means we are literally operating out of fear. And instead of when we face something, when we acknowledge it, a lot of times the fear just goes away.
It's so funny. It's so true.
It's so like, but that, I think you're right. People are like kind of shoving things down. I'm just going to like get away from this quote unquote bad thing instead of facing it and understanding what's there and then being empowered. And I did that with all of my psychic abilities. Like basically when I didn't know what to do, instead of taking classes, learning to face it, I was just like, I'm just going to ignore my psychic abilities, la 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 la, and just like ignore everything. Hear it, not hear it, not see it, anything, hear no evil, see no evil, speak no evil kind of thing. But it wasn't evil. It was just what it was. And I needed to learn how to handle it. And the other thing is a lot of these beings, these entities and lower vibe kind of beings they're very much in a lack of power. I do think of them as like energy parasites, and they just don't know how to operate in another way. And in that way, they are very weak, because anything that needs power from something else to be powerful is weak inherently. And with physical parasites as well as these entities, I'm just like, hey, compassion for you, be in that place, but I don't want that. And, clearing that out. So like with parasites is like, sorry, come back as something better. Love ya, but not with me. And I think we can shift what we allow and accept in our field over time. And it's kind of like, even with parasites, I'm still like, I love you, I know what you're going through, but no.
Yes, Laura, this has helped me so much. You said this in another episode. I don't remember. I'm sure you've said it multiple times. I think about this a lot because I live in the woods in Vermont. There's lots of ticks.
And yeah.
So I just had one in me yesterday, and I had to pull it out, and I had to be like, I love you. I appreciate that you deserve a life too, but we're separate. And you're like, I love you, but no, thank you. You're not welcome here. And like, I think that about any Lyme or anything. And it feels so good to view it that way. And it is exactly the same as with fears. It's like, I love you. I appreciate you. You're valid. Your emotion is valid, but this is what I'm choosing to view and believe instead. Like, and
right. Yeah.
It's bizarre to do it with such a physical thing like a tick, but it's the same idea as with your fears. Like it seems scary, just the idea of it. But then when you embrace it with love, you're like, you're just a small, innocent being just trying to live your life just like I am. Like, yeah, what's that different between us? You're just doing the best you can. I'm just doing the best I can, but you're not welcome here.
Yeah. And I think it helps to look at it as like, death is not an evil thing. And a lot of times from a soul perspective, these are just kind of younger souls going through their process. Think of like a baby only knows how to think of themselves. Like they're just like, I need all this stuff and I need to be taken care of. And a lot of the creatures, animals, that are in that kind of space of like just needing to take, they're just young, but the only way they do it is through that experience. And so you can have compassion for them being, but at the same time, okay, had that experience, now come back as something more evolved.
Yeah. I love that.
So I don't feel badly about ending that if they're feeding on me in a pattern that I don't want to be in this life. And I think a lot of us right now are kind of shifting out of that martyr pattern. Like you mentioned the martyr pattern earlier, which is that like, I need to sacrifice myself in order to help others. And it's like, no, that doesn't have to happen. And as we set boundaries, both emotionally, energetically, physically, spiritually, then it shifts what is brought to us. So the more we can do that, but I do think it's important to do it in a loving way. Because if you're like, I hate you, you're just like, you are literally, your cells are feeling that kind of hate, fear energy.
And especially if
and then you attract more of that. So it's just not helpful.
Exactly. And especially if everything is a mirror of us or part of us, if we all are connected, if we hate anything outside of us, we're hating ourselves. We're projecting that on ourselves in some way. So, and I love what you said about it, the end of life or death not being a bad thing. It's just it's just different than this. And I had to actually just yesterday when I did this with the tick, I had to feel that. I had to be like, I love you. Now on to the next thing for you. Like, it's not, it's not absolutely. This because it can't be like,
and I want to clarify with like fear or anger or whatever, these are natural emotions and I don't think they should be labeled as bad. And I think they're a natural response and sometimes sharing something with us. So like, I feel like anger often shows up when something about our boundaries is not being honored or acknowledged. and it's telling us something. And then, but I think the key is not to be in that state for a prolonged period of time. Like take it, learn whatever it is that it's sharing with you, and then shift out of it. Like, okay, thanks for the information.
Yes, hallelujah. Yes. This is what the book Super Intense is all about, is because, I was told I needed to tone it down, like play it cool, like, like numb out a little bit more because you feel things too intensely. But now it's like, no, my intense emotions are so helpful. They fuel me. They help me understand my desires more clearly. And like you're saying, if I feel anger, I know I got to look at something. What's going on in me that's causing that? Thank you, anger, for helping me understand more about myself. Thank you, sadness. Thank you, worry. Thank you, guilt. Thank you, shame. Thank you, all those feelings. None of them are bad. But like you said, they're only useful in limited amounts of time.
Right.
So it's like if you don't work with it and you just try to ignore it, then it builds and grows and grows. And next thing you know, it's not actually useful to you. But if instead you're able to look at it with love, just like a tick on your body, and you're able to be like, hey, what are you doing here? What are you trying to show me? Learn from it and move forward, then it's a beautiful thing. And so I think our society has such a fear about fears, a fear about feeling bad. And
Totally.
that's what perpetuates the idea that it's bad. And imagine how different our lives would be if when we were little and we were feeling intense, lower emotions, if someone was like, hey, here's how to work with them. These are actually good. These are a strength that you have. And some people are going to go their whole lives only feeling pretty much neutral, but you have a big range of emotions and they're going to serve you in your life. How different would our lives be?
Yeah, and also just to look at it like, what is it that this is sharing and providing for me? Like, what information is it giving? And I think this is so, so important. For example, for me, when I'm like really triggered with anger, it's like, okay, what is it that's out of alignment for me here?
Yeah.
Okay, is it maybe this particular relationship? Maybe I need to not be in that environment. Maybe there's a particular belief or viewpoint or something that's not serving me, but there's always something for me to address. And I think that we can look at it as information, and also that there's a productive part of it, instead of like, I think what you're talking about is like anger bad, fear bad, depression bad. Ooh, let's just shove this in the corner.
Yeah, that's the message we've been told.
It's like, don't put baby in the corner. I feel like don't put anything in the corner. Like it needs to be in the light so that you can figure it out.
Exactly.
In the light is when you figure it out, and it's so important. Sorry, go ahead.
It's especially, I'm just totally, I just love you so much. I feel like this conversation is so important and it gets me so excited. Like you're saying about the light, imagine this fear is just a small scared child in a dark bedroom afraid of a monster under their bed. Are you going to go, that monster doesn't exist, you idiot? Like ignore it. You're not going to do that to the child. You're going to turn on the light and lovingly be like, hey, look, there's nothing there.
Yeah.
But why aren't we doing that with our emotions? Why aren't we turning on the light and be like, hey, I get that you feel this way, but look, that's not the truth. Like, here's the truth. Let's lean into this.
Yeah.
Like we, especially because at least in my personal experience, most of my fear-based feelings stem from like way back when I didn't know how to process them. And now they're bubbling up because now I can process them. Now I can hold my little girl version of me's hand and be like, hey, darling, it's okay. Like, let's look at this.
Yeah, I think it's a process and a journey. I'd love also to talk about, how did you literally kind of wean yourself off all these intense medications? Because I'm sure that was a process. And are there any resources you recommend for people who are interested in learning more about that?
So I do need to find a good resource for people, because for me, it was a lot of trial and error, and I don't recommend it on anyone because I didn't do it safely multiple times. I just kept trying and trying and failing. And then finally, what ended up working for me. So I guess my best advice is find a doctor, like keep going. If someone's like, no, you have to be medicated forever, find someone else. Like keep interviewing every doctor you can until you find one who believes in what you're doing. And I think more and more they're popping up. Now that I've done this, of course, law of attraction, now I'm attracting more and more people in my life who are in the mental health field who believe it's possible. But initially, because my first thing was told that it's not possible, that's what I believed also. So law of attraction, I kept attracting more doctors who didn't believe it was possible. So I think first step, believe it's possible and be on the hunt to find a medical professional who could help you, because truly there are so many bizarre things that can happen if you don't do things right with your medications. But what ended up working for me is I started doing daily meditation. And I didn't think I could meditate because I was like so heavily medicated for ADD. I would put on my headphones and put on a guided meditation by Gabby Bernstein. Was the first album I bought. I bought like 3 of her meditation albums and put it on repeat as if music went out of style, which is a lot for me because like music was my life before that. And I'd walk around and meditate. I don't do this at home, but I would drive and meditate. Like I would pretty much any time that I wasn't needing to be talking to someone at work. And I had this really pretty stressful job at the time too, with a lot of responsibilities. So I would always be doing that. And eventually I was able to use it as a bridge to sit in stillness and be alone with myself. And once I started doing that, Laura, once I started being like, I'm comfortable being with who I am and accepting my emotions no matter what they are, that's when the magic really started happening. It was those moments of just being alone with myself and accepting the good, the quote unquote bad, which now I don't view as bad, but at the time, starting that bridge of understanding the difference between it being bad and just being something else, everything just is, and accepting it all. And furthermore, welcoming in angels. This is not something I talk about in my book. My book, super intense. It's written for someone who may be where I was when I started, which was like not sure if I had a spiritual understanding.
Right.
So it's pretty vague and open to interpretation. I think if you have a spiritual lens, you might view some of the practices in there as spiritual, but if you don't, then you won't. You could choose to see it how it aligns with you. But truly, what really started helping me is when I started reading this book. There's so much here. So what first got me into this was Marianne Williamson's Divine Law of Compensation. That's when I started opening up to ideas of spiritual concepts and law of attraction. That led to Gabby Bernstein's books, and then to Opening to Channel by Oren and DeBen. Are you familiar with that one?
No.
I just was like, why not try this? For so long I believed in nothing. So I was like, well, I'll just decide to believe in something instead. Like I made that choice. So I'll just make this choice. And even to this day, Laura, a part of me is like, I'm just choosing to believe that I got all these loving guides and angels, and it feels great to believe it.
It's a
like,
much more comforting perspective.
Yeah. Like even if at the end of the day, I can't, none of us can prove anything to be true. Well, at least I feel good about it. At least I love it. At least it's serving me and helping me in my life. And so that's kind of like where I started to have a spiritual practice, was just being like, well, I'll just choose to believe it. I'll just use my imagination. And so which I now realize my imagination is so closely linked to my intuition, but I didn't know that.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, totally.
I didn't quite realize. And so what would happen when I started meditating in stillness is I would go on these epic journeys. I'd be shown these visions and these quests and things. And I just thought when you meditate, that's just what happens. And to this day, I'm just a very visual meditator. And I told my mom about it. And so she connected me with her Reiki teacher, got me into Reiki classes.
Right.
And with that book, How to Channel, or Opening to Channel, it's called, not How to, Opening to Channel, I didn't really take it seriously. I didn't understand, like you were saying, about there being lower entities and higher entities. And I read one chapter, I think, and the next thing I know, I told a friend, I'll channel for you.
Oh man, if you start to channel without protections, watch out. You never know what you're going to bring in. It's just.
Do you want to hear what happened?
Oh, yeah, sure. I have a feeling, but go ahead.
I was like, I'll channel for you. So we sit down and I start bringing in this beautiful imagery. There's like this bird, and the next thing you know, everything starts to go numb on the right side of my face. Yeah. The light started flickering. My eyes are closed, so I didn't know this. She told me later that the light started flickering, and then my dogs started freaking out. They're barking, they're going wild, and we heard like a loud bang, and I was like, I'm ending this. And I like opened my eyes, and I was still like numb on the right side of my face, and I called my mom. She told me to call her Reiki teacher, and her Reiki teacher this is the part that like, I do not tell this story this much. This is so much fun to tell though. So I call my Reiki teacher, and she's like, you need to take my Walking the Dead course this weekend. I was like, what are the odds? And still at this point, all I'd been doing was pretending to believe in something spiritual, right? Like I wasn't even yet feeling that any of it, like, I was just dabbling. And so I was like, Walking the Dead, this sounds, at the time, I genuinely was like, this sounds crazy, but okay, sure. So my mom's like, call in Archangel Michael, call in 1,000,000 angels. She sages the place. She comes over and like cleanses and clears it. And then come to find out, my friend had someone in her life who had a very dark passing and didn't know that they had passed. And I
Yeah,
was experiencing some of the things that this person had gone
sure.
through, and they didn't want help with. So Walking the Dead course was helping people cross over using Reiki. So people who don't know that they've passed in the physical
Which is
think they're
definitely
still
the
here.
hardest when they don't know for sure. Yeah.
And this person did not want, we had a whole group of us, maybe 18 people or so. And for the most part, every single person in the group had someone they were helping cross. And most of the time, everyone in the group could stay. But when this person came up, it was like me and the Reiki teacher were allowed to do this. And it was like, there was just so much
Yeah.
darkness around
Yeah, I
it.
can feel it.
And, but then after that, after feeling the release and seeing people cross over all at the same time as this room full of people, at that moment, I was like, I can't deny this anymore.
Yeah, no, when you have these experiences, it's like, okay, well, even the analytical, logical part of you just can't explain this stuff away.
And even with Reiki, I only took it because my mom, she signed me up because she wanted me to be able to give her Reiki. And
Okay.
I had a neighbor who had had a stroke, and I was practicing it on her after just my first training. So I wasn't even like that far advanced yet. I had just had like a weekend training, and I was just trying it out, and I'm chatting with her. I'm doing the steps, but I'm like not, I'm, I really wasn't taking it that seriously. And she was able to feel her face for the first time since the stroke. And I was like, okay, I need to start taking this stuff more seriously. Like, I can't
Yeah.
keep denying it. And after that, incorporating a spiritual practice into my routine has made such a difference in my life.
Yeah, you brought up several things that I think are important to highlight. One is Reiki absolutely is so helpful if you are, wanting to tap into your intuition, see what's really going on, have a better life. It really pops you up in psychically. And the other thing is if you have any kind of, what is labeled as a mental health issue, I highly recommend getting psychic training because I guarantee you are quite psychic and you just don't have any context or tools to handle it. And one of the things that hopefully you'll learn, so I do training, there's other amazing teachers out there, but is that idea of protection, because it's like if you open up a channel and you experience this, you need to make sure that what you're inviting in is like of the light and helpful, or like it's kind of like, we need to have doors in our house and we need to have,
Right.
don't touch me just randomly at anyone, or just, have sex with me, whoever. Like we have to have these kind of
Right.
boundaries, and energetically, spiritually, most people have not learned how to do that. And if you're psychic, it's like even more important because you are like a glowing light attracting everything. And you have to learn how to put in these boundaries. So I wanted to mention that because I feel like it's something that's not really addressed that much. And I don't know if you've heard of Dr. Judith Orloff, but you might find her work interesting. She really helped me because I was highly analytical when I started all this, master's in poli-sci, working in government, like not psychic woo-woo, like at all. And she's a psychiatrist who's also a psychic. And reading about her helped me be like, oh, you can be. And I really think like for now, as I've developed, I'm equally left-brained and right-brained. I think it's really important to honor the physical material world, but also like, hey, there's this whole other thing that we have to honor and balance that. So I think it's important to like acknowledge both sides. And thankfully, I think there's more and more mental health professionals that are
I agree.
acknowledging this. And meditation, like you mentioned, is a wonderful, wonderful tool
To
for
this day
everyone, but
now. Yeah.
especially if you are struggling with anything in terms of mental health or are super psychic.
Yes, thank you so much for bringing that up, because that is a part of the story that, my book is more about the practical tools that I use daily. There's like
Yeah.
20 different tools between meditation, sleep, journaling, all this kind of stuff that have helped me, and they're all very practical just because, if people are at a place where I was, where I didn't know if I believed anything, these are the steps I wish I had then. But then
Yeah.
moving beyond that, it's and a part of me wishes that I could have just dove into the spiritual first, because it helps so much, but I wasn't ready.
Yeah, I think you're ready for it when you are, and there's
Right.
nothing you can do to kind of hurry that along. It's the same thing. Like I kind of had to go through my crash and burn, I think, to understand why it was even important. Because society teaches you analytical, logic, structured material, so that I had to like basically learn what happens when you ignore the other side in order for me even to value it. you
That's
know,
such a good point. Me too. Me too.
yeah. So I think
Everything in perfect timing.
yeah. Oh my gosh, Marissa, this has been so fun. I feel we could just talk for hours. Is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners today? We'll have to just have you back another time.
I'm like everything. I know I could talk to you for hours, Laura. But I feel like this is such a good, at least first step to understand your intense emotions are not bad. You can work with them. They can serve you. You can use them for good, like a superhero who gets them and doesn't know what to do with them. Just work with them, learn how to use them. And I love what you said about exploring psychic training, because once I started to use my intuition every day, which I actually do talk about in my book too. So it does dabble a little bit. I feel like intuition is becoming more and more accepted as well. But
Yes.
which is awesome. Like you see it even in like the business world, like people talking about. And once I started to learn how to connect with that and trust that changed everything. So I think approaching it as a full circle of more than just the physical, more than black and white, this is bad, this is good, is key.
Yeah, I think we're going through a big shift right now where we've been at this very kind of male, very structured, kind of institutional approach to everything. And it's being broken down now to honor the intuition, the creativity, the feminine, the less structured way, which, and by the way, this can feel terrifying when that's what you're used to. Internally, societally, that's happening. I think we're all being guided to like kind of create from within and not rely on the system as much for us. But gosh, I think this is the perfect time to do this podcast because of that. And thank you so much for talking with us. If people want to learn more about you, get your book, connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
Probably just my website, Marisa, Marisa, Imon, IMON.com. And Laura, something just came to me that I should probably bring up for anyone who's listening and wondering. So I mentioned how it was a messy process coming off of meds, and how, I'm not necessarily even against meds. They saved my life. I have now been medication free for 4 years, and I've never felt better, but it was 3 years of work to get to that point of daily consistent work. And I imagine if I had done it with a medical professional, it would have been shorter. But I'm realizing I didn't give those specific timeline details, and that may be helpful for someone who's wondering how that went down.
I'm sure it is helpful. Yeah. And I really think that this is a journey and a process. And I just want to mention with meditation and the spiritual work, intuition, psychic training, all of that, it is like a marathon, not a sprint, in the sense of like, you learn slowly. And I mean, you might have just big leaps and bounds as you go, but overall it's a journey and a process. And with meditation, I say all the time, I'm not good at meditating. I'm like, actually, even if it feels hard, it's working. That's the thing. It's like, just
you can't get it wrong.
Yeah, just keep doing it. And it's probably going to feel really uncomfortable in the beginning, and that's okay. It's kind of like, if you just were like laying in a bed and then you just went to the gym, like you wouldn't be able to immediately run a bunch or something. Like it's going to feel hard, like, and that's okay. It's okay for it to feel hard, but if you just work through it and maybe do it in, bite-sized chunks or whatever, do a little bit at a time or a little bit, just keep doing it because it's so rewarding and impactful. Marisa, it's been such a pleasure to talk with you today.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much, Laura. I adore you. Thank you.
I adore you too. Thank you for
Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. You as well. I'm excited to connect with you.
So grateful
Hopefully
to you.
in person. For those who don't know, we're both big podcasters. I don't think you mentioned your podcast, so definitely mention that too.
The podcast is called Incandescent, and it is designed for people who think they can't meditate. So you can listen while walking, while working out, while dancing, while doing something else. And then it's a bridge. I have people who started, they're like, I can't meditate. And they listened, and now they sit in stillness. So it's supposed to serve as a bridge. And then you can continue doing it even after you've found a place where you can sit in stillness. But Incandescent.
Okay, great. Yeah, just felt like some people needed to hear that. And I look forward to hopefully when we can connect in person live again at some kind of podcasting or other event soon. So thank you, Marisa. Have a blessed, wonderful day. And thanks for talking with us.
Thank you so much. You too. Bye, Laura.
Bye. And thank you everybody for listening. If you'd like more information about me, you can go to my website, healingpowers.net. You can find me on Twitter at Laura Powers, Instagram at Laura Powers 44, and on Facebook at Healing Powers. And we talked about meditating. You can also find my meditations on Insight Timer at Laura Powers 44.